In this video, I want to talk to you guys about how to shoot fast enough to matter, or at least the components that are involved in this. So, with that said, first thing I want to talk about is the OODA loop, and this is going to have an effect throughout the entire process of shooting fast enough to matter. And I know a lot of people are going to rush and think and jump to the conclusion that shooting fast is the only thing that matters, because they're not going to realize that the latter half is what's really going to dictate your speed. Shoot fast enough to matter. So let's think about this for a second and as we go through this. So first thing is OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. So this is basically where you observe something that could be potentially a threat. You confirm that it is a threat, and this all happens incredibly fast. Like within quarter to a half second you decide this. You go through this whole entire process typically. And then you orient towards that, and that could be, actually facing, maybe your peripheral vision picked up something that might be a threat, you looked at it, you faced it, and then you have to make a decision based on the kind of threat that it is. You have to decide how you are going to react to that. Are you going to put up your guard for a hands-on encounter? Are you going to put up a guard while you go and draw? You got to decide what you're going to do, and then you have to get to that act component. Now, I mentioned the OODA loop because this is one of the parts where you get the problem where the rest of this is kind of useless. I mean, shooting on the range is one thing, but actually having to use these skills that you're practicing on the range, it gets a little more muddy. So there's a lot of times when people will basically be in denial. So they'll orient towards the threat, and then when it comes to the decision portion, this is where you get the freeze response or the hesitation, because they're deciding what they're going to do, and it's like, but they're kind of in denial. So the D could kind of stand for denial instead of decision. And for some people who are kind of, a bit comfortable in their lives and stuff, and they don't really believe that a threat could actually be coming to them. They couldn't really fathom it because it had always been, gameplay or whatever. But you can train past that, adopting a philosophy that it's only a matter of when, not if, you're going to have to defend yourself against a threat or defend others. So then the act component. The act component can be part of, you can get some hesitation on the acting because you might have second guessing about the moral implications or maybe even the legal consequences. But that really goes down to training, is understanding what you are legally allowed to do and training for those types of responses. And I use response instead of reaction, because reaction sort of, I kind of associate that with an impulse. So with that said, the OODA loop can be trained to work faster. You making decisions a lot quicker and stuff like that. You can train yourself to work a lot quicker behind the gun. So I do have an article written about this on my blog at doitrightak.com, so check that out. I'll leave a link in the description below. So moving on. The next one is response versus impulse. So this is what I'm really talking about, is there's a difference between responding to a threat and reacting to it, or impulsively just doing something that you were trained to do. Now, this gets kind of muddy. I mean, there's certain things that you want to have that are impulsive, like the ability to draw without having to look at your holster, or having to look at your gun as you're getting a grip on it to go out, or have to stare at your sights or whatever. You shouldn't have to do that. You should be able to superimpose that on your naturally focused threat, because that's typically what happens anyways. But this portion has more to do with after the act portion, the beginning of the act portion, i.e. the initial shot is conducted. You're responding to the continued threat. So after each shot, you're still evaluating under recoil if you're actually having any effect on your threat, or if perhaps the threat is done with. So I'll just point this out. In a lot of videos, you'll see a lot of people saying, okay, let's do the 1 to 5 or whatever, where you do 1 round on one target, 2 rounds, 3 rounds, and then back to 4, and then 5. That's cute and all. That's supposed to teach them to be comfortable with shooting multiple rounds instead of just those 2 rounds at a time, which is kind of pointless, because that first shot is meaningful, that second shot is just a Hail Mary, hope it gets in the right area, and hopefully it's worth it. But sometimes first shot works, sometimes it doesn't. So you're constantly having to evaluate your threat. And there's a guy who teaches, I don't remember his actual name, it's Jared, and I don't remember his last name, but he's a former SWAT officer, and he was shot in the line of duty, but now he trains, and one of the things he talks about is don't outshoot your brain. And so he's telling you, based on his training in SWAT, where they have to be accountable for every round because, lawsuits follow police officers, they have to respond to the threat as they're shooting them. So only shoot the amount of rounds you need to fire. So you're cognitively responding to a threat. You're going through this cycle each time, not just throwing rounds and that at some point 10, 15, 20 rounds into it, they actually go down. Well, were those 20 rounds necessary, or would it have worked with 6 rounds? Well, if you would have actually been evaluating that threat, then you probably wouldn't have needed to shoot, 20 rounds, because you see that a lot on police videos where they're just unloading on somebody. But that's usually a problem with training and stuff like that. They don't really get forced out onto the range as much as some people would like them to, but everything costs money. So anyways, we have that luxury to spend our spare time as enthusiasts to kind of correct this. So don't be following suit where you're just unloading your mag and hoping that you'll cognitively catch up at some point. Make sure that every round is counting, because it is true, there is a lawyer behind every bullet. The next one is procedural reflex. This is basically where you identify a need to either reload or correct malfunctions, and you need to keep your eye on the threat, so you're reflexively going through something. You don't need to stare at it. And this is because if you're actually fighting for your life and you end up having to reload, maybe you're behind cover or whatever, it takes milliseconds for your brain to be able to decide and go through this process right here on what you need to do if they become a threat again. Because taking your eyes off the threat for any amount of time, you will miss a lot of detail, and you're putting yourself behind the power curve, because it does take time to go through the decision-making process and to identify a threat. You're missing out on that potential threat. Most of the people advocating just staring at your gun while you're doing a reload, they either are working in a team setting where then if they have to reload, they peel behind somebody else, or they deactivate themselves and go somewhere else and have people covering them, or they run competition where there's really not much harm in staring at your gun while you're performing a reload or correcting a malfunction. That's understandable. But when you're on your own and you're your own protector, or you're in a very small team, you don't really have that luxury. You need to keep your eyes on the threat, because seconds count, milliseconds count, nanoseconds kind of count. You need to be able to have that time to process what they're doing and react as fast as possible. You can't do that staring at the gun. So make it reflexive to do those procedures. You shouldn't have to stare at the gun. When I do those procedures, they're down here. If you need to look at the gun because something went wrong, quick identification and then running through that procedure is the best way to go. Keep your eyes on the threat as long as possible. Make it reflexive. This can take time, to build, but it's definitely worth it, and that's my recommendation for that. The next one, transitions. It all comes back to being visually sensitive and being able to go through this decision-making process, being able to observe and orient and decide quickly. That's what makes fast shooters fast. So if you see someone like Kyle Lamb shooting his 1 to 5 drill, or whatever he calls it a drill, I call it a course of fire, because it's not something that you want to drill. It's something that you can test to see if you're obsessed with 2 rounds or 3 rounds. So if you see him running through his transitions, it looks like he isn't even actually aiming or confirming his sights. But he is. He's just been working. He had been working on it so long that he's got a very good, very quick acting OODA loop. So he's able to observe that his sights are on, and he's able to control his gun very well and decide, hey, I'm good to shoot, and then he acts on it and he shoots. So that's the difference between somebody just shooting fast and someone shooting fast enough to matter. And of course, distance is going to play a part, but that's the point, is you're observing, you're orienting, you're deciding, and you're acting. It may take time if someone's far away, because obviously you have to, thread the needle, as it were, as distance goes out. So it's going to take time to do that. But the more you practice at range, the less time it takes. So, don't be trying to skip out on things just to be able to be part of that first part, the shooting fast part. It's only sexy when you actually make your hits, I'm telling you. So anyways, I appreciate you guys watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Check out my blog, and you guys have a good one.